Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Two Cooks Talking. I am Nguyen. I'm not a professional cook. I'm just a guy that really likes to sit behind a stove and do his thing. With me is my co-host, executive chef Michael Weller, who is a professional cook. Mike, I don't know if you want to run down any of your credentials right now.
I've just been cooking since I was 15, and the math turns out at a pretty big number there.
All right. I guess I don't really have a format for the show yet. I think somewhere down the line, I was kind of thinking something similar to Good Eats, where we kind of go with a topic and then kind of move along from there. But I feel like for the first episode, kind of do a rundown of and kind of an introduction to ourselves as kind of pantry essentials for each other. So kind of what we always keep in the kitchen, things like that, just to keep on hand. There are pretty much guarantees that everyone should have. So like salt and pepper, pretty much, everyone should have those. I know I prefer. I just only have pretty much one of each type. So I usually have kosher salt and black pepper. Those are pretty much my go-tos for seasoning of anything.
You know,
So
that's going to cover the vast majority of what you need. I always have a finishing salt. I always have some kind of coarse salt with some mineral overtones to the flavor to put on at the end of cooking.
okay.
But I could get by without it. Don't tell my wife.
So when you say finishing salt, is it like is it a texture thing that you're going for there, or
It's a combination of texture and flavor.
okay?
So the idea being, if you cook a piece of meat, the any seasoning you put on the piece of meat is always on the outside of the piece of meat. There's nothing flavoring or seasoning the inside of the meat.
Okay.
So classically, you would cut the piece of meat into slices and then sprinkle a finishing salt over the top. Finishing salt over the top of a salad, things like that. Just before the food is served, the grains on like a sea salt are large enough that they actually provide a lot of texture. They pop and crunch in your mouth, and the flavor is really remarkable. So I would never. You see celebrity chefs on TV shows all the time using very expensive finishing salt to flavor their pasta water with. I mean,
Mm.
give me a break. I use kosher salt. I like kosher salt. It works very well for the majority of the needs. But
Okay, cool. Um, Now when it comes to pepper, I just have like a simple pepper mill that I got from the supermarket, just full of ground, or just black pepper. It has settings for coarse and fine. I think it usually works fine with me. So I don't know if you have any kind of suggestions going that way either.
I typically use black pepper 95% of the time. I'm not a big fan of white peppercorns.
Mm.
I I wouldn't call it a pantry essential, but I love pink peppercorns. But one of my pet peeves is I think the pendulum is swung too far, and you constantly hear people say freshly ground black pepper.
Mm.
Well, there's a nice element in knowing that you just cracked the pepper yourself and it hasn't been sitting around for a very long time.
Mm.
But but the perfume and the aromatics that make freshly cracked black pepper really wonderful are killed by heat. So if
Oh.
you're cracking black pepper over the top of a steak and then slapping a steak over a grill, you're losing all that wonderful perfume. You're just getting a basic heat level, spice level from the peppercorn. So I like cracking the black pepper for other reasons,
Okay.
but it's not that essential. It
No, that's
really
funny.
isn't.
Yeah, I always yeah, I have no idea why I crack it personally. I just know that it's something you do. So,
I mean, I love the smell of good black pepper. I
mm,
love I love the taste and the flavor of it. I love it over a fresh salad. I love it at the end of cooking. Again, where all those beautiful aromatics that provide all the range of flavors and aromas that you're looking for aren't burned off.
mm.
And you can check it yourself if you don't believe me. But I don't want to get away from just the physical act of cracking black pepper in a pepper mill. It makes me happy. So
All right. So, what are some other kind of pantry essentials that you have?
I think we go probably to spices. I
Hmm.
think you have to kind of make a choice. I have a spice grinder dedicated to grinding spices, and again, much like the peppercorn, a lot of the nuance is lost if a spice is overcooked. Spices are really easy to burn. So I would say a pantry essential would be a spice grinder,
Okay.
so that I can buy whole spice, whole cumin seeds, for instance, and buzz it up in the blender.
Is there like an economic factor to that, or is it just because you tend to get better flavors with?
It's a quality
Okay.
element. Spices, even kept in a cool, dark place,
Hmm.
pre-ground spices are going to last a matter of months at most,
Oh,
2 or 3, before they fade and they lose again all of the nuance, all the
right.
subtleties. So,
Okay. That's good to know because yeah, I have a bunch of racks of just already done spices that I just grab. Um, all right, cool. So I think going on to spices, there's certainly some spices that I have on my shelf that I always reach out for. Crushed red pepper. I go through that stuff like crazy. I use it in just about everything with toppings and when I just cook meats and I like just putting crushed red pepper in it. And actually, lately, I've gotten really into making my own hot oil, and that's what I've been adding
mhm.
to my hot oil. I know some people recommend just getting the dried chilies and then using a food processor to grind them up, but I just use the crushed red pepper because I feel it's roughly the same, right? I mean, I'm cooking it anyway, right?
Um, Again, but I think you might try. I mean, it doesn't sound like turnover is going to be a problem with inventory in your
Yeah,
kitchen with red pepper flakes, but
yeah.
I know kitchens where they sit for years
Hmm.
and they become dusty and they become flat and they lose a lot of the spark. So I love red pepper flakes. It's an Italian technique as much as anything else, but you have to remember that the pepper wasn't originally in any of the places it shows up in food around the world. But it's a technique in stir fry. It's a technique in the beginning of Italian recipes. It's one of my favorite ways to get spice into a dish, is to infuse it into an oil early in the cooking process.
Okay. All right. So, what are some other spices that you reach for?
Um, Cumin.
Uh,
I'm a huge fan of
I
cumin,
think
and
with us being like in California, and then I'm a Texas native, you're a California native. Cumin is very popular in Mexican foods, right? So,
incredibly, and I married a wife who's a fan of Indian food.
mm,
So, I mean, it shows up in different guises around the world,
right.
but it's just such a wonderful flavor.
Yeah.
Um, Smoked paprika or Spanish pimenton, not just the red dust.
You can't just say like some random thing. What was the second thing you said?
Pimenton is Spanish paprika.
Okay.
It's paprika is just a pepper, like a red bell pepper.
Uh,
Um, but it was brought from the New World. It found a home in Spain and in Hungary, and in both places became elevated in part of their cuisine in an amazing way.
mm,
And so I think often in the United States we think of paprika as that stuff you sprinkle over the top of a deviled egg,
yeah, yeah,
and it's just red, and you use it because it's red.
yeah.
But a good quality Hungarian paprika or a good quality Spanish paprika has smoke and depth and ranges from really, really spicy to completely mild and sweet. And I have several jars of pimenton on my shelf as a standard in the pantry. I'm a fan of dried dill. It's one of the spices that tastes as good, if not better, dry than
Mm,
fresh. Um, I like dried thyme leaves. I also would say a pantry essential is a live rosemary and a live thyme plant and some kind of access to bay leaves.
mm,
But as a dried spice, I think thyme typically survives that process a little better.
okay.
And dry oregano. Dry oregano works really well.
Now on the topic of drying, I've got like I usually keep some cloves of garlic just on the counter. I should probably put it in a better place on the counter, but like I just have some on the counter that I use in my cooking. I actually got in the habit of buying little jars of freeze dried garlic. I don't know if the freeze drying process is any better than conventional drying. I don't know if you have any knowledge on that.
I do. And I'm really not. Look, I can sit down and throw French terms at you for the next half hour, and I can talk a good snob game.
Yeah.
Okay, but you and I know each other. I'm not going to try and fool you with it. I'm not going to try and fool any of the listeners. Um, Different applications just work.
Mm,
Garlic powder and garlic salt certainly aren't going to work in some kind of application where the subtlety of a garlic flavor is predominant.
right.
But if you're putting on the outside of a steak that you're about to grill, it's
Yeah.
going to be just fine. So I like freeze dried. I think freeze drying is from a quality aspect does a really good job of preserving a lot of the natural flavor.
Mhm.
And it keeps better than just dried up ground on the shelf.
Okay.
But I don't know what it is. I don't know who came up with this other than convenience. And I've grown up with it for 50 years. Everybody, as one of their wedding presents, gets a spice rack.
Yeah.
And the spice rack gets hung next to the stove.
Yeah.
You couldn't have a worse place to put a spice than in the middle of the heat and the light
Right.
of the stove. It's just, but there you go.
Okay. So I guess the recurrent theme is that with spices, you need dark and cool temperature, dark and cool kind of areas to keep them, just to preserve them. Is that right?
They last longer, and again, they're not going to last forever. So, it may be that we don't have to worry about the chili pepper flakes in your kitchen because you go through them rapid. That's a good thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Spices like that in my kitchen, I like dry ginger. Use it in different ways than I would use fresh ginger, but I like dry powdered ginger, and I like cardamom.
Hmm.
I don't worry about those going right.
Right.
But there are other spices that, if I had a quality visit right now, I wouldn't pass
Yeah.
because they've been sitting up there for a long time.
Do you have any spices that are, I guess, more non-conventional that you usually try to keep that are pretty good? Like one thing that I have actually gotten really into lately is I've been using powdered peanut butter in my cooking. PB2 is the brand I use, and I use it a lot of my stir fries. And if I want something to be thickened up a little bit,
Hmm.
it's a great thickener, and it doesn't change the flavor too much. You just get a nice little subtle peanut taste to it. It's delicious. I don't know if
I
you're familiar with that.
I'm familiar with. As a professional cook, I have a paranoia about food allergies,
Okay.
and the idea of dusting a little peanut powder into something to thicken it up, that's just a nightmare. But that being said, I love peanut, and I love different ways of thickening.
Hmm.
Right? Fortunately, we've lived through, or I lived through. You probably were born out of the decades of thickening everything with flour and butter roux, um, and I'm done with that. I haven't worked with nut thickeners as much as I've worked with a lot of different alternatives in starch thickening.
Hmm.
And I think that would be an essential in a pantry, certainly. As far as secret or unusual ingredients on my spice shelf, truffle salt.
Really?
I Truffles are magic.
We talked about truffle oils a little bit, like offline, and
Yeah.
we both have a little bit of disdain towards truffle oils. So what makes truffle salt special?
Okay, so here's the difference. Yes, and just put me on record as not being a fan of truffle oil and the overuse of truffle oil
Mm.
and the ridiculous crimes that are committed with truffle oil. The difference being, a truffle salt is an actual truffle product.
Okay,
It's not.
it's not a perfumed.
It's not a perfumed thing. It's not. I have nothing against food chemistry. I think food chemistry is wonderful. I'm not worried about chemicals in my food because I know all food is chemicals.
Yeah.
But that being said, most of the truffle oils available commercially are at least enhanced with an artificial mix of chemicals designed to induce some of the flavor of the perfume of a truffle. Truffle salt is a two ingredient product.
Mhm.
It's salt and truffles.
Okay.
And the salt and truffles are ground together. And it's an authentic truffle aroma and flavor. Incredibly powerful, incredibly easy to use, but affordable.
Mhm.
The day I hit the jackpot, I will have black and white truffles in season every year, just laying around my house. I'm not there, so I got a jar of black truffle salt on my shelf, and it does a lot of the same functions. Um, in a similar way, I think another secret pantry item I have is dry porcini mushrooms. Just a tremendous umami boost, and you grind them into a powder and introduce them much like you were talking about using the peanut powder,
Mhm.
as a flavor agent where you might not even taste mushroom, but because of the umami property of enhancing flavors around it,
Mhm.
it really builds flavor. in a wonderful way.
Yeah, I remember mentioning this to you a long time ago. I remember reading some blogs where or some food journals where they're talking about using ground fish bones as an umami agent as well. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. I personally think that's kind of weird, but who knows? It might be actually be usable. I actually keep MSG on in the
Hallelujah.
cupboard, so like I like using MSG just for the same purpose.
It works, and it works very well.
Hmm.
Luckily, most of the look, if you're convinced that a certain food gives you migraine headaches,
Hmm.
don't eat that food.
Right.
And I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
I will tell you that the overwhelming scientific evidence suggests there's no connection to MSG in any kind of health problem.
Hmm.
And it's backed up by a lot of common sense. But I'm not going to tell you what to eat or what to put in your mouth.
Yeah.
I think fish bones make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. So, from two different traditions, one of the common things in the Mediterranean and throughout Europe as a flavor enhancer, one of my favorite lamb dishes involves black olives and anchovies
Mm.
smeared on the outside of a leg of lamb. And the anchovies, I'm promising you, nobody plucked all those little tiny bones out of the anchovies. Um, and the bones are used in that way, and then spin the globe halfway around, and every variation on fish sauce from the Philippines to Thailand
Hmm.
involves juices that are running off salt baked fermented small bony fish.
Yeah.
So cut to the chase and make something straight out of fish bones. I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else that you can like? Something I've gotten into recently that I've really been enjoying is I've been putting Sichuan peppercorns in a lot of stuff. Oh,
Ma.
so I don't know if anybody's ever been encountered Sichuan peppercorns, but they're hot, but they also numb your mouth. It's kind of like anesthetic kind of
Yes.
property. And For me, I actually put in my with my when I make my hot oil, I first cook Sichuan peppercorns in the hot oil and take the peppercorns out, and it brings a lot of the sweetness out in the chili that I really like. So, but yeah, Sichuan peppercorns are pretty cool. I don't know, they're fun to use.
They're incredibly cool.
Yeah,
Just an amazing ingredient,
yeah,
and that combination and it's a unique combination. It's off the top of my head. I'm not thinking of another ingredient that has that mouth numbing
I
property.
mean, cloves kind of do, right?
They're,
Yeah,
they're, they were used for dental work. If
yeah,
you think dentistry is bad now,
yeah.
but not nearly to that
Right.
impact or that effect. Yeah. And cloves might be another exception.
Mm.
I know that I have a jar of whole cloves
Yeah.
that I could time out in years on my spice cabinet right now, but they are so potent that if
Mm.
I dropped it in a spice grinder and ground them up, it would probably still be a pretty potent clove.
Okay.
Yeah, Szechuan peppercorn's a fabulous, fabulous ingredient.
Do you have any other ingredients that you kind of keep in the back, your little secret weapons?
Um,
I know Alden Brown. He did. I remember he once did a show kind of similar, it's just about pantry essentials, and one thing he brought up was turmeric, and not enough people use turmeric, and it's what is that, like a Middle Eastern kind of like a Mediterranean.
it's
Uh,
a root originally from the Indian subpeninsula.
okay,
So fresh
I've never
turmeric,
really used
fresh
turmeric,
turmeric
so.
is really cool. It's the
Mhm.
brightest, orangiest little rhizome, like a piece of ginger.
Mhm.
But dried, um, I like turmeric.
Mhm.
I don't love it.
Okay.
There are health benefits to it that would be another reason to use it. And I think it's another case of buying a fresh quality spice. If you leave it sit on your shelf like most people do,
Mhm.
after a year, it's just a food coloring,
Mhm.
and it's lost most of its nuance or subtlety.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think. Yeah, like I said, I haven't really used turmeric all that much. I think I'm somewhat familiar with the flavors just because I do eat a lot of like Indian food, and it's probably in there somewhere. Curries use turmeric
Hmm.
typically. Um, I think staying with a lot of the cooking I do at home is a lot of Asian cooking, but I also do a lot of like greasy American cooking too. So that's always fun. But so one thing that I like to use is I keep Chinese five spice. I think
Hmm.
it's a really one hit wonder for like if you want food that tastes like Chinese food, you just put Chinese five spice in it. It's that flavor. Kind of like how I feel when you talk about cumin earlier. When I think of Mexican food, I think of cumin because it's such a dominant flavor in the for a lot of the Mexican food that I've had.
It's interesting because cumin is actually more predominant north of the border than it is south,
Oh, really?
right?
Okay.
So in a lot of authentic, and again, we get in trouble. It's silly to say American food and look at Texas and New England
Hmm.
and Seattle and try and fit them all under one umbrella,
Yeah.
and it becomes just as ridiculous. So when we say Mexican food, if Quintana Roo is a state in the Yucatan,
Mm.
and the flavor profiles and the cooking approach there and on in Oaxaca versus the West Coast versus the Central Mountains,
Mm.
the cuisine ranges.
Right.
So, but yeah, just as a note, if you were to look at Mexican cuisine as a whole, cumin would be a spice that's not nearly so predominant in Mexican cooking as it is in border cooking. Or
Interesting.
yeah,
Well,
so
yeah, I guess going back to my background, like I said, I am from Texas, so like I guess it's dominant Tex-Mex a little bit. So
sure,
yeah.
and absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time in San Diego.
Mm.
And there is a special thing that happens where cultures have active fusion on all fronts. I think it's a wonderful, very powerful thing that happens. And the cuisine that happens in these kind of places can be really terrific as you're borrowing the best.
Hmm.
All right, and people like eating good food. So I love naturally occurring fusion around the world. I think some really fabulous things have happened with it. On Chinese five spice, I another secret ingredient in the background of all kinds of stocks and all kinds of meat cooking and braising is one of the key ingredients in Chinese five spice. Star anise pods.
Hmm.
They are magic. They are just crazy magic.
Yeah.
Chuck one or two of those into your next pork stew and just don't tell anybody, and it's amazing what happens.
Yeah, I think I'm very familiar with the flavor of star anise because a lot of times pho uses star anise, and so
Hmm.
that's a very key flavor. It's kind of a licoricey flavor. It's anise, so like if you're not familiar with anise, it's licorice. So uh, I love that flavor. It's one of the flavors I just grew up on. Interestingly, I actually went to a Chinese food buffet place not too long ago, and they just had a big like serving tray of peanuts with star anise pods in it, and I was just wondering what you're supposed to do with that. I don't know if it. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
No, I would have been intrigued. I would have grabbed a handful and hoped I
Yeah,
wasn't doing something badly wrong.
yeah.
I mean, did the flavor rub off?
I didn't. I assume so. I didn't try any. I was just like, I just thought it was really strange because I wouldn't even know what I would have used it on on my plate. Where,
I don't. You know, there was a time in restaurant presentation styles where it was really popular to have a charger or a large plate
mm,
and then a pile of things you weren't supposed to eat but influenced, and then a second plate on top of that pile of
mm,
aromatics.
mm.
And I could really see some combination of star anise and peanuts in that kind of
Oh,
context.
this was like separate with all. It was where all the sauces and all the things where you get for seasonings was.
Time
So
for a field trip, man.
yeah,
Let's go try it out.
yeah. Um. Okay.
How about
Oh,
oils?
oils. We can talk oils. I keep pretty much personally. I keep three oils on hand all the time. I just extra virgin olive oil I use for mostly dressings for myself,
Hmm.
and then I use canola oil for a lot of cooking. Just a nice little base, frying oil or whatever. And I use peanut oil just because when I'm making, well, specifically for my hot oil, and I make that pretty much once a week. I make about 2 cups worth of that, so like I keep peanut oil on hand too. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on oils?
I would agree with them. I think canola oil is one of the greatest examples of marketing ever. Canola oil is one of the most popular oils used in Europe,
Mm.
but it's sold by a name that just doesn't work in the United States.
Yeah.
Canola oil is rapeseed oil,
Yeah. I
from
used
the rapeseed plant.
Yeah, I used to joke that it sounds more like it sounds more like forensic evidence than it does actually a food ingredient.
But hallelujah for the marketers. Canola oil is a great oil. I have canola oil in my counter or in my cupboard. I have a good extra virgin olive oil. I have a just an olive oil.
Mhm.
I go to the canola oil a lot for a lot of different uses. And in my fridge, just so it doesn't go rancid as quickly, sesame oil,
Oh yeah,
dark
I
sesame
keep
oil.
sesame oil as well,
Yeah, but
but I just use very little of it. Like with my hot oils, I put a little bit. If I make fried rice, I'll just like put a little bit on top, but that's about it. Um, I guess going back to the olive oil discussion, some people may be novices to cooking, and honestly, I'm usually a little iffy on the definitions too. So, what makes an virgin olive oil extra virgin?
yeah, the story it tells its father. I don't know. Extra virgin olive oil typically is also labeled first cold press. So you harvest a bunch of olives from the fields. You rush them as quickly as you can to be processed.
Mm.
So you can get olive oil, the oil out of the olive fruits, a lot of different ways. If all you do is put pressure on the olives, if
Mm.
you just squeeze the olives, what runs off is the first liquid that runs off is called first cold press, and it's an extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is technically defined by the acid content in it, but from a consumer, from our way of looking at things, extra virgin olive oil is that first run beautiful olive oil that has all the extra flavor ingredients, that has all the extra flavors and perfume to it. But if I've worked all year round for one harvest and I squeeze these olives for all I can squeeze them for, and I got some olive oil out and I grab all of that and I wrap it up and I seal it off and I sell that as extra virgin olive oil, well, I know I can go back and heat those same pressure plates up.
Mm.
And if I add heat to the process, I'm going to get some more oil out of it. So I'm going to squeeze the olive oil, the olives again, and add some heat to it, and I'm getting more. And
So
then I can go back a third time and add various different chemicals that will make them juice a little bit more and squeeze them again.
okay, so each iteration is like another grading for oil. I'm guessing the first time you heat is what, virgin olive oil or
That the determination on virgin, extra virgin, pure, light,
yeah,
light's a marketing term. And give
yeah,
me a break. It's a fat. It
yeah,
has the same number of calories as any other fat.
yeah.
But it's based on the acid content. The acid content is determined by how you harvest the oil. So
Okay.
on the other end of things, it's not an either or condition. Extra virgin olive oil, for all that's incredibly delicious, is a rotten choice for a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's so powerfully olive that you would never make your chili oil
Right. Yeah.
out of it. It's got so many flavor ingredients, flavonoids, and other compounds in the oil that it has a tremendously low smoke point.
Hmm.
You can barely heat up extra virgin olive oil hotter than you can heat up butter. It,
Right.
it starts smoking and burning way early.
Yeah. And we were just talking about sesame oil, which is the same way. It's got a very low smoking point.
Yep.
So.
Pantry ingredient butter.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, butter.
Yeah. I put butter in a lot of things I probably shouldn't have, and probably use too much butter, but it's so delicious.
I um I will eat butter as butter, so I'm not going to point any fingers. And I always buy unsalted butter.
Yeah. Of course.
The same reason, one of the basic reasons behind unsalted anything as a preference. So the reason that you would add salt to butter
Hmm.
is it lasts longer.
Hmm.
If I was a farmer and I was making butter and I didn't have refrigeration to keep it, I would salt the butter because it would last another week and a half, 2 weeks.
Right.
Don't blame you.
Yeah.
But my refrigerator works, and I go through a lot of butter.
Yeah.
So unsalted butter all the way.
I guess staying on the dairy tip, I always, of course, I always keep eggs. Eggs are one of my favorite things in the world as far as food goes. Eggs makes everything better. I have friends that don't like eggs, and I don't know what's wrong with them because eggs are delicious. I always say that one of my simple joys in cooking is just scrambling some eggs, just because it's there. I use the Gordon Ramsay method of taking it, having it on the heat, taking it off the heat, on the heat, off the heat, over and over, and it's kind of like a Zen-like process for me. But yeah, I put eggs in a lot of things. It's awesome.
Eggs are magic.
Yeah.
We have chickens.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to be without eggs.
Yeah.
Eggs are magical on just a food chemistry level. Egg whites are almost pure protein and do amazing things in protein matrices and foams. Egg yolks contain lecithin, which is an emulsifier. It helps bind. So if you're making a oil and vinegar dressing, if you leave it sit, it tends to split off into oil and
Right.
vinegar. The lecithin in an egg yolk is what holds creamy dressings together. It's what makes mayonnaise. It is what holds oil and water together, and that's in an egg. I love eggs. I agree with you. One of my favorite things. Now you've gone through a whole history and evolution with scrambled eggs because you did sous vide
I
scrambled.
tried sous vide for a little bit. The I love the flavor or the texture of it. My problem is the time consumption. It takes forever to sous vide eggs. For those unfamiliar, sous vide is cooking in a water bath using vacuum conditions typically, but with eggs, yeah, I probably put it in a bag. Sometimes I'll soft boil eggs inside a sous vide process. But what the main objective of sous vide is that you can set the temperature you want it cooked at, and it will only cook to that temperature. And it's for nerdy people like me, it's great to have that level of control and kind of definitions to your cooking. So I still use it for meats. So like chicken, I will only cook in sous vide just because I don't trust myself cooking it stovetop or any other way. Just because there's so much that can go wrong with chicken. There's like a small window where it's good, where it won't kill you and it won't be like cardboard.
Right.
And so I use sous vide because then I'm happy there. But yeah, for scrambled eggs, I was sous videing for a while. But like I said, it took me about 25 minutes to cook it that way, and it was a little more of a process. And and then just putting it back on the stove was just kind of it's such a magical experience.
Right. I think I have come around. I am a fan of sous vide.
Hmm.
In many applications, but I think there is something intimate and magic about making scrambled eggs and
Hmm.
making them low and slow and labor intensively. I
Yeah.
mean, not allowing any of those protein curds to get too large,
Right.
and that that's the wonder of cooking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That I'm a fan of omelets in the morning. I can make an omelet out of anything or a frittata. We throw lots of parties at this house.
Hmm.
Then the morning after one of the parties, it's all of the leftovers and whatever eggs got hatched, mixed together and baked up in the oven. That's breakfast. My son has developed an appreciation for Scotch eggs. As much as you may want to insult Great Britain and its contribution to the culinary world, they gave us Scotch eggs, so shut up.
Yeah, yeah. I have my own. I have my concerns with British food just because I like it's good, but it's usually just meat and starch, right? So but there's nothing wrong with that. It's just kind of you get kind of the samey type of flavor profiles and textures.
I think modern British food is as good as any food on the planet, but I think
Mm.
they're going to have to suck it up historically
Yeah.
and take their shots. Mostly because just history wasn't kind to them.
Mm.
They were cut off from the source of spice.
Mm.
Their traditional enemies, Spain and the Netherlands, had control over all the spice trade, and no way they were trading with the British.
Right.
So British cuisine grew up on no peppers and no spices because they were cut off from peppers and spices.
Yeah.
Can't blame them. But like a Scotch egg, that makes up for an awful lot.
Um, I guess so. Another kind of going back to what you were talking about with dressings and using the lecithin from egg whites as an agent to keep a dressing together. One thing that I've been keeping a lot more is Dijon mustard and using it for the same purpose.
Yes.
It's kind of a like a dressing hack I learned from. I don't. I think it was either from Lifehacker or from Brothers Greens on YouTube, a cooking channel. But I usually use that. like I said, this same thing. The Dijon mustard keeps it together and doesn't split it. I
Hmm.
don't know why, but it just does for me.
It does for everyone.
Yeah.
I think if we're talking pantry essentials, a good high quality Dijon mustard sh should never be out of your fridge,
Hmm.
ever. It is magic on a chemical level. It is an emulsifier. It'll bind oil and water. It will help a little spoonful of Dijon mustard into your mayonnaise. It helps it not break when you're making fresh mayonnaise, which
Hmm.
is something everyone should do at least once so you can taste what it should taste
I
like.
have yet to make fresh mayonnaise, and I keep on wanting to, but it involves using one part of the egg, and I don't want to waste the other part of the egg, so I have to figure out because it uses the whites, correct?
It
Or
uses the yolk.
the yolk. Okay, I can get rid of the whites. I'll just use the yolk.
Or I'll give you a recipe for a meringue and you'd be
Yeah.
happy if you really want to be. Yeah, I think Dijon mustard is another essential ingredient. Worcestershire sauce would always be in my fridge. On a similar note, big.
I used to use that a lot, but I don't use that as much lately, just because for me, Worcestershire sauce it tends to overpower for me, and so it's a very anchovy heavy, I guess, right?
It does have a small amount of
Yeah,
anchovies in it. You can burn people on trivia questions all
yeah,
the time
yeah,
on whether Caesar salad has anchovies in it,
yeah.
and it
It
does because
does.
it's got Worcestershire. So, um, and you can buy vegetarian Worcestershire. It's another one of those secret glutamate sources. It's
Mm.
one of those things you can put in the background of a food, or a braise or a stew, just to use umami to intensify the flavors around it.
Mm.
So
I guess in a sense, it's fairly similar to like soy sauce and kind of its qualities.
you one of my favorite shows, the Cook's Country TV show, where they do a lot of food science. Any number of their braises, whether whatever culture they're making a braise for, shares a common soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce, and tomato paste
Mm.
base just for the glutamates, just to pump up the umami.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Did you have any other ones that you keep in mind?
Oils, butter and salt, and you're set.
Yeah. I
Butter and
guess.
salt, and you should be happy. Kicking around in my fridge.
Well, we were talking about salts, and you said finishing salts and sea salts would fall in that category for
Hmm.
you. And then, like I said, I just keep just kosher salt, uh, and then I don't do sea salt just because I don't really have room for it. But I probably could add it to my pantry. I used to use sea salt, but once I started using kosher salt, it was just like I just preferred using that just because it's just the pinchability of
Yep.
kosher salt, and it's just fun to just put that pinch in your food, and I like doing that. I don't know if there are any other salts that you like using. Like I've seen your shelf, and you have like a lot of crazy salts, like
Well,
Himalayan pink salt, and yeah,
I did promise my doctor that there was a time where at work I kept a bowl of different salts from
yeah.
different sources on my desk, and 3 o'clock in the afternoon I started feeling a little down. I would just eat some salt, and I promised my doctor I'd stop doing that. Um, it, it, the thing with kosher salt
Mm,
is just that it's shaped differently, right?
mm,
So table salt that we all probably grew up on is round and it's slippery and it's really hard to control.
mm.
And kosher salt is flaky, like
Yeah,
dandruff shaped, and it you have to literally push it off your finger.
yeah,
So I know how much is going in.
yeah.
I spent 2 weeks cooking in Japan, where for various reasons the kitchens there didn't have access to kosher salt, and we were using granulated table salt, and it messed my. It was a very hard transition to make. It was very difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Um. All right. Yeah. If that, I don't know if we're running about 40 minutes right now. I really don't have a whole lot else. We could probably do another episode later about other things that we want to talk about. We didn't even touch on vinegars. I got a few vinegars on my in my
Oh yes.
in my pantry, but we could probably save that for another episode. But for the first episode, I think this will do us. Got any last words, Mike?
I just love talking about food. Thanks for
Okay.
the chance.
All right. Thanks, everyone.